Hello students, standard 7th. In science, especially in physics and chemistry, we completed all the chapters. So now we are going to revise them again. So if there are any confusions, any queries, then you can solve your queries from this revision. Here in the revision, we will discuss some questions, and in the form of assignment, you will write down the answers on your own. We will discuss here about the questions and their answers. So listen carefully and then find out the answers. You can take the help of your book also to find out the answers of this question. So we start with the physics chapter number 13, motion and time. Now we know the word motion, and when we say that an object is changing its place or position with respect to time, then we can say that that object is in motion. But if it is not changing its space or the location, then we can say that that object is at rest, or it is a stationary object. So when an object is moving, then we can say that it is in motion. Now we learn the different type of motions, like the linear motion, that is in the straight line, then circular motion, then the periodic motion, oscillatory motion, etc. That are the different types of motion. So if the motion is in the straight line, then it is known as the linear motion or rectilinear motion, because it is in the same direction with the same speed. Other motion is in the circular path. For example, the motion of the blades of a fan, wheel of any vehicle, etc. Oscillatory motion is to and fro or back and forth motion along a middle point, that is known as oscillatory motion. For example, the motion of swing, motion of a simple pendulum, etc. Then periodic motion means the motion repeats after the same interval of time. Then that motion is known as that motion. So now what are that example of that periodic motion? The hands of the clock, then the motion of earth around the sun or the moon around the earth, motion of pendulum, etc. are the examples of periodic motion. Then other motion can be random motion, means it is like anywhere, like mosquitoes flying, birds, flying in the sky, children playing on the playground. They don't move on a particular path. So that type motion is known as random motion. So different type of motions are there. Now when the objects are moving, we can see that from their way of motion we can decide whether it is slow or fast. Because if we give some distance to cover, then the vehicle or the object would take less time to cover that distance. Is said to be faster, and if it takes more time, then it is slower. Similarly, particular time is given, that in that time the object which will cover most distance is the fastest one, and which one is taking small distance, cutting only, then it is known as the slower. So the relativity of the motion, we can say about it as the speed of the object. So what is the speed? Actually, speed is the distance covered by an object in unit time. The distance covered by an object in unit time is known as the speed of that object. So now the speed can be obtained by the formula distance covered divided by time taken, and then by division you get the value of the speed of that particular object. So what is the basic unit of speed? You know that the basic unit of distance is meter and basic unit of time is second. So now speed is distance divided by time, and therefore the basic unit of speed will be meter per second. There are some other also units like kilometer per hour, meter per minute, kilometer per minute, etc. You can choose different units for distance and time. You get different units for speed, but the basic unit or the SI unit, standard unit, is the meter per second. Then the time. We know that the time, measurement of time. You know that nowadays we have so many devices to measure the time. But in ancient time, how our ancestors were able to understand about the time? Generally they were watching the natural phenomena and they were guessing the time. They were looking the shadow, length of the shadow, and according to the length of the shadow and the direction of shadow, they were guessing about the time, like morning time, afternoon, evening time, etc. So the ancestors were using the length of shadow to get the time of the day. Similarly, what is a day? Now we know that 24 hours is a day. So we can watch in our watches or clocks or mobiles, etc. Then we know that the new day is started. But what about that ancestors? Because pendulum and then watches were after so many years. Similarly, the other clocks like sand clock, water clock, sundial, were also found later, but in the ancient time, they were watching the natural phenomena like sunset and sunrise. They saw that one sunrise and the other sunrise, then again next sunrise. They noticed that it is completing a day and almost the same time. So from one sunrise to the next sunrise, that time period they count as a day. So one day they were completing as the next sunrise. From one sunrise to the next sunrise, they call it as a day. What about the month or the fortnights? Fortnight means 15 days. For 15 days and a month, they were looking about a moon. You know most the phases of moon. When there is no moon or the new moon day and full moon day come after 15 days and that. So now from one no moon day or new moon day to another new moon day, they were calling as a month. We know that Amavasya and the Purnima. On the Purnima day, we got a full disk of moon, full moon day. And that is the 15th of the day of the month. And then again it is going smaller and smaller, and then on the Amavasya, no moon day or the new moon day we call it. That day we don't see the moon in the sky. So from that day to the next new moon day, the whole time period they were taking as a complete month. What about the year? For the year, they were watching the different seasons, like the spring or the summer, etc. In this situation, the time period between the season starting and then completed and the next time the same season starting, then the whole time period they were regarding as a complete year. So without watches and clocks, they were deciding the time according to this natural activities like phases of moon and so on, seasons, etc. And then they were deciding about the time. So we also know about the uniform motion and non-uniform motion. Uniform motion means if an object is covering same distance in the same time of interval without changing the direction, then it is known as uniform motion. And if it changes the speed or changes the direction, it means that if it is not covering the same distance in the same interval of time, then that motion is known as a non-uniform motion. Now, what are the most common devices used to measure the time? We know that nowadays the most common are the clocks. And that clocks are the most common devices nowadays to measure the time. What are the most common here? Now what is the most common property of most of the clocks? Now the common property is that they all of them are using the oscillatory motion, which is actually periodic motion. So the periodic motion is the main common property among them, because that clock, the hands of the clock are doing the periodic motion. there can be three hands of the clock: minute hand, hour hand and second hand, and they complete one circulation in particular time. So that is time period. I mean that periodic motion is the most common property along the clocks. Now simple pendulum, most of the clock or watches are using the simple pendulum. Simple pendulum belongs to a, in which we have a thread along with a very metallic or stone is tied, metallic ball or a stone is tied at the end of the thread and it is suspended so that it can move freely. That is known as a simple pendulum. The metallic ball is known as bob, B-O-B, bob. Now, what is the length of simple pendulum? Length is not only the length of the thread, but length of the thread including the length of that bob together here is known as pendulum. I mean length of the pendulum. You know most pendulum is like that. This is the thread and that is the B-O-B, bob. So from here to here, the whole length, not only the length of the thread, but from here to here, the whole length is known as the length of the pendulum. So not only the thread, but along with the lower end of the bob, the whole length is known as the length of the pendulum, simple pendulum. Now, simple pendulum is doing the oscillatory motion. So if you hold this bob and take one side and then you release it, then it will go like that, and that motion is known as oscillatory, to and fro motion, which is known as the oscillatory motion. Now the pendulum complete one oscillation when suppose it is released from here, then it will go in the middle, again go that side and come back. So from here to here, it's said to be completed one motion, one not motion actually, one oscillation. So one oscillation complete from the one point to another and then back to the same position. Then it is known as its complete one oscillation. And the time taken to complete one oscillation is known as its time period. What is the time period of a pendulum? That the time taken to complete one full oscillation is known as the time period for a pendulum. What are the factors that affect the time period of a simple pendulum? So generally the factors are, one of the factor is the like gravitation, obviously the gravitation of the earth, that will be the first and the other one is the length of the pendulum, etc. So that are the two most common factors that affect the time period of the simple pendulum. Now before the clocks with the pendulum came into existence, how did the people watching the time? So which devices were used by people before pendulum clocks to measure the time? That were the sundial, the water clock, the sand clock, etc. They were using those devices before the simple pendulum came into existence. Now you know about the speedometer and odometer that are fitted in your vehicles. Speedometer show you the speed of that vehicle, and odometer which records the distance covered by the vehicle. And what is the relation between speed, distance and time? We know that speed is equal to distance divided by time, or you can say distance is equal to speed multiplied by time. So there is a relation between those three things like speed, distance and time. So here we are going to finish the session. You will watch the video carefully, so you will get the answers and you will write down as an assignment in your notebook. Thank you very much.